I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Deb Olin Unferth.
And to quote a character from Deb's novel Vacation, I despise a querying man. Well, tonight, Deb, you get two of them in Matt and I here on Concavity Show.
Great. That sounds good to me.
Hey, right on. Deb, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
It's so good to be here.
We've been talking for half an hour already and covered so many great things. Unfortunately, they're lost in the ether, but we'll try and get some of them back here. So for folks who are unfamiliar with Deb Olin Unferth, which your name has come up a few times on our show, Deb, Jessica Anthony had some wonderful things to say about your writing, and that's sort of what drew me in, like, oh, I got to read Barn 8 now and Vacation. Turns out I'd read your book Minor Robberies 13, 14 years ago, something like that. That little 3-sleeve collection, hardcover collection from Dave Eggers on McSweeney's. And then we had Brandon Hobson on recently, and you guys are pals, and so your name just kind of kept coming up, and we were like, okay, let's see if we can get Deb on the show, and we've both been reading and enjoying your work immensely, so here we are. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. I was so excited to see Brandon's name and Jessica's name, and I went and immediately listened to the episodes.
Awesome.
And it was so great to hear their voices.
Yeah, so we'll get into how you guys know each other shortly, but I'll give a little bit of bio background for our audience for some context, and then we'll dive into that. So Deb, your birthday is November 19th, same as mine. So
how is that a bio?
Twins.
That's not the bio, Dave. That's just coincidence.
Well, on her Wikipedia, it's the first thing, born November 19th, 19... Yeah, so I was like, great, we have the same birthday.
Well, happy
cool.
Birthday to both of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm,
By the time
you.
this comes, maybe I'll release this on our birthday, Deb. That would be like a fun little present.
That would be great.
So if it's not clear already, Deb is an American short story writer, novelist, and a memoirist. I mentioned Minor Robberies, which was 2007. Vacation was your novel with McSweeney's in 2008. Jacob McGraw-Mickelson, who happens to be my favorite artist on the planet, did the cover for that trilogy bookcase.
Oh,
and he did the cover for Jessica's The Convalescent and the cover for Adam Levin's The Instructions and lots of other great stuff. You also have a memoir called Revolution, The Year I Fell in Love and Went to Join the War. And most recently, Barn 8, your novel from last year in 2020, which is what we'll spend a lot of our time tonight talking about. You have appeared in, like, I can't believe how many great publications you're in, Deb. You're in Harper's, New York Times, Paris Review, Granta, McSweeney's, Believer, Esquire, Boston Review, Noon. Yeah, we talked about Noon with Brandon as well. And you've won all kinds of awards, like the Pushcart Prize twice. You're a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for your memoir. And you're also an associate professor in creative writing at the University of Texas at Austin. So you and Matt have all kinds of mutual friends we were just talking about. And you teach there for the Mishner Center and the New Writers Project. And then we're going to love to follow up on this with you a bit later, is what you founded, the pencitywriters, which is a 2-year creative writing program at maximum security prison there in southern Texas. And you won a big award for that in 2017 as well, Texas Governor's Criminal Justice Service Award. So there's a whole mouthful of bio on who Deb Olin Unferth is and her worthiness of being on our show.
Thank you for joining us today. No, it's really a pleasure, really an honor to have
is.
you as part of our show. We're big admirers of your work. All of these books he's mentioned are just fantastic, and it's really just great to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
I want to start out with a little bit of your career trajectory, because you were originally a story writer, and this is a common thing with MFA programs where you get people who they apply on a story, they get in, they write more stories, right? And then they're publishing stories, and then I'm thinking of a lot of writers who've been in this position is like, after you publish like one book of stories, they're like, when are you going to do a novel? And so I want to ask you about, first of all, just the novel. Did you always want to write a novel? Did you always just want to write a great sentence? what made you want to be a writer and really write stories?
Back when I started writing, was a long time ago. I was 25. Stories just had a different place in our culture than they do now. Everybody read books all the time. Everyone was reading. You couldn't go to a party and not be in a conversation with people about the books they were reading and be standing by their bookshelf looking at their books. And that's like business people, like people from all walks of life. It was not just, just like the college students. It was, it was just a very important part of the culture. And I really wanted to take part in this conversation that was that was taking place on the page. And so that was kind of why I started writing. I guess that really what happened was that I met a guy in a bar, and he was really cute, and he said he was a writer, and he said, "What are you?" And I said, "I'm a writer too." So then I had to start writing, and that's how I started writing. And then, we were together for years, and we just wrote and wrote and wrote, and it was really great. And then I wound up going to grad school, and so that's really how I got started. But as I wrote, I was already just kind of interested. I studied philosophy.
Oh yeah.
And
you traveled a lot too. It seems like that informed a lot of your writing too, right? Like seeing the world.
I traveled. Yeah, I traveled quite a bit. My grandmother lived in Mexico when I was a kid, and I would go and stay with her for long periods and go to school. I went to school part of the time with her there, and my family would take us. Yeah, we did. We traveled quite a bit.
Well,
yeah.
One of our favorite writers, Bolaño, he has this line like reading and traveling are the same thing, one and the same. And I'm a big believer in that seeing the world or being curious about the world often translates well to people who are able to describe the world or to imagine another world, and all of the it's hard to do if you're just a hermit,
That's so interesting. Yeah, I do think that there is something about describing the world that makes you a person. I've kind of always felt that way, that whenever I'm feeling ungrounded or whenever I'm feeling like I just don't really know who I am anymore, I just start describing. I'll do something like, I just give myself the assignment that every day I'm just going to describe this little piece of wood or this little corner of the concrete or something like that. And I just sit and I write several pages just describing that little thing. Because I feel like if you can describe that, then, and if you can just focus on that one thing and just describe that one thing, then it's like you are like finding your voice and you're reaching into your mind, and you're changing and growing just by sitting there and describing that.
See, you could write a book of exercises that's just describe the table, describe the wall. I actually think that's really hard to do, and like you say, that gets you your mind in the right place to even just keeping words flowing, I think, is important. But I want to ask you again about this tension between the story and the novel, because people, like you said, in the spare time, reading is a form of entertainment. There's a lot of stories published in the New Yorker. People would read for entertainment, and reading novels, you can't sit down and read in one sitting, most novels. So how did you start writing like a story and say, I'm a story writer?
Well, once I just wrote the first one to impress the guy, I just decided I was a story writer. Oh. And then
I just like self-actualization. That's all it takes.
Yeah, I basically, in those early years, I just wrote a story every day. And then, and then but I kind of still do that. I still sort of write a story a lot of days, not every day, but I write a story most days.
And we should say Minor Robberies, this slim little book, right? It's 145 pages, and it's like, how many stories in that book? 60?
I don't know,
like 30 about?
Maybe like 30 something.
Right. Yeah. 30, 40.
Okay, another book you guys don't seem to have is Wait Till You See Me
That's
Dance, which
20.
I published a couple of years ago.
Oh, cool.
That is also full of short stories, and it's got also a lot of really tiny shorts in there.
And so when you're writing
Awesome.
those short stories, are there characters, are there scenarios that you want to come back to and write in depth more?
Now, okay, so that has never happened. It's usually like when I write a short, it's like I hear the whole thing in my head. And it's like a sound or something that gets stuck in my head as I just look at something, and then or as I experience something, and it arrives whole. And then I just kind of write it down really fast, and then I revise it for like a year. And it doesn't shrink or grow. It stays about the same number of words, and I just kind of change the words around. But if I'm going to write a novel, that's a whole different thing. That's like I think when I think about a novel, it's it's like I want to I something happens, like I see something, I see a or I get like a spark in my brain, and suddenly a whole novel jumps into my head. But that's going to take years to write. And um and I think that what happens is it's like that one little spark, and I call it an initia. I think of it as an initia, is how I always refer to it. It connects to so many different parts of my brain that refer to so many different levels of experience and of history and of, you know, political concerns, and it refers to so many different things at once that in order to unpack that, you need a lot of room. So that's how a novel comes to be.
And I've read with Barn 8, right? You said in some other interview that, what came to you first is this image of the birds being liberated, right? So that came to you before the characters, is that right?
Oh yeah,
That, yeah.
it was the birds. Yeah.
So it's like there's like kind of a writing prompt, image, vision, and then that from that you start to extrapolate a world and characters and what's the story behind that explosion of birds.
Yeah, because like I just feel like the brain is so complicated that in any one complicated thought, there's just so much to unpack. And so it's like, yeah, so like I had this image of birds that were lifting out of a barn, like they were like flying out of a barn. They were chickens, so chickens don't really fly, but these chickens were flying. So they were just flying out of the barn. And, I mean, I'm vegan. I hadn't been vegan for that. I'd only been vegan for a few years, I think, at that point. And I mean, I just knew that that there were a lot of layers there, and I really wanted to unpack them. And then like, I get those kinds of flashes all the time. We all do. And then the question is like, which are the ones that you want to grab and hold on to and nurture and grow?
And we should, summarize a bit for people who have not read the book yet, that this is a book about chickens, and it's really a plot that revolves around, I wouldn't say liberating
A mega heist.
a million or close to a million chickens. It ends up being about 900,000, right? And I want to ask you about that too, of why not, it's fiction, right? Not just make it a clean million or 10 million or 100 million. Or I guess it's just practically, it's difficult to.
I can answer all your
Okay,
questions.
this is great. This is great. But so there are a host of different characters here. The book starts out with a girl named Janie, and we meet her friend. She's an auditor. She becomes an auditor. I'm really just skipping quickly here for people who have not read the book, but we meet another. I believe Cleveland is an auditor, not an investigator, right?
She's an auditor. Yeah.
Okay. There you go, auditor. And they are the ones who begin this plot to liberate a million chickens. I'm really short selling this summary. I should have written this out before. I'm sorry. Dave, why don't you rescue me from this?
We try to be as spoiler free as possible, but like that's the seed of the idea of the novel, right? Is you have these two people who are like, this is kind of a grotesque factory farming industry. This animal deserves greater dignity than this. And you go into some really amazing passages about the intelligence of chickens and sort of the biological history of chickens. And at one point you call the chicken T-Rex's pretty little niece, which I love that line. And so it begins a plot that starts to involve myriad other characters and a bunch of quirky characters into pulling off this heist. And so we don't want to say too much more than that so as to spoil some of the plot points, but that's sort of the grand picture, I guess. Is that fair, Deb?
Yeah, it's like a heist. It's like these two auditors for the U.S. egg industry. They go rogue, and they decide that they're going to steal an entire farm's worth of chickens.
Yeah.
And they have to, all in one night. And in order to do that, they have to assemble a team of people who are going to help them. And everyone has kind of like different motivations for participating. And as the team grows, the team kind of takes over. And then Cleveland and Janie, the original two auditors, are kind of just swept up with the rest of them.
Yeah, it kind of takes on like a life of its own that they maybe hadn't planned for, I guess, in some ways.
And I will say, as a reader, my impression of a industrial chicken farm is informed partly by what I've seen on TV or in movies, right? I have not been onto an industrial chicken farm. I've never seen a million chickens in one, or however many fit into one of those giant barns at full capacity. I've never heard it, smelt it. But there's a brief glimpse of this in the movie Napoleon Dynamite. There is a chicken scene in that movie where he goes and has to work. I remember that. And he's like,
I don't remember.
He's like, do the chickens have large talons? But he goes into a chicken farm, and the sound is just deafening. And it just looks absolutely like miserable work for these kids who are doing it. Also, I thought in a couple of places of the movie Fantastic Mr. Fox, which has a chicken stealing scene. Although these are wild animals who are looking to eat the chickens rather than they're liberating them, but in order to eat them. And so I think, my question for you is like, what drew you to chickens to write a whole book about chickens, but also, what you knew about chickens versus what you learned about chickens, I guess.
So, once the image was in my head, then, I didn't know anything about chickens. Like
really?
Nothing.
Okay,
nothing.
So a lot of research went
No
into
backyard chickens. You didn't have backyard chickens.
No. I'd never befriended a chicken. Like, I didn't know anything about chickens. But I was a vegan, and for animal rights reasons, and so I cared. And it could have been pigs, it could have been turkeys, but I just fixated on chickens, mostly because of the image. But then it just kept making sense. The more I thought about it, the more, like, just the better it seemed to me that it had to be chickens. Like, it had to be chickens. Like, for example, chickens. I have like serious political reasons. I have existential reasons. Sure. I have reasons of humor. I've got like so many reasons. But just to go through them, politically, chickens are the worst treated of all of the animals, and the egg-laying hens are the worst of all of the chickens that are that we breed. So that was one reason. And then another reason was that chickens are really they're just very interesting. Like they don't fly, but they have like huge wings. So there's just something strange about that. And there aren't a lot of wild chickens. Like the chickens that most chickens
are
domesticated. There are some wild chickens, like in Hawaii and places like that. But So we have just so many of these animals, and they're all domesticated, and they're hardly any of them are even like, have guardians or anything. They're just locked in these cages. So that's really strange. So like, what's their personhood at this point? If they're breeded in that way, like, I don't know what their personhood is. And then they're also, they're just like, they're funny. Just, you say chicken and people laugh. And they're also really humble. Like, nobody wants to read a book about chickens. People might want to read a book about horses or about elephants or about, dogs.
Something with grandeur. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gravitas.
Like, yeah. Even monkeys are apes, but nobody wants to read a book about chickens. And
You did.
so
Turns out we do. Yeah. And loved it. So
thank you. So
well done. You sold us on the chicken.
Well, that was my challenge. I'm like, God damn it, they will love chickens when I'm through.
Well, you don't really try to anthropomorphize them. You don't try to say right from the point of view of a chicken, like a whole book that's just like, oh, these are all the different quirky chickens and give them personalities. There is one particular chicken that you do that to, but not like, what was your thought process there of like trying to get in the mind of a chicken or convince a sort of non-vegan audience to empathize with individual chickens out of, a million?
I mean, so yeah, that was a problem. There was this one moment where there was a woman, after AWP at some point, like you're in the airport and there's all these other writers. And I ended up sitting next to this woman on the plane she was like some like famous newscaster, and I was telling her about this book and she was like, yeah, but why chickens? And I was like, well, and she said, why don't you do turkeys? So for a while I was like, oh my God, maybe I should do turkeys. And then I was like, God damn it, no, it's going to be chickens. And I was like, and even that woman will love these chickens. So I mean,
it was a
I
challenge
really
to convert her basically.
Yeah, I mean, but everyone I talked to was like, why don't you do whales? So
or dolphins. You covered
yeah.
dolphins a bit in Vacation, or one specific dolphin, or with the dolphin untrainer.
Exactly. Yeah, there is like, yeah, you remember that from the book. So I really, it was like, once you start looking into the history of chickens, they become really complicated. They have a huge amount of personality. They have, like domestic arrangements. They've got, friends. They have, they talk a lot. They have conversations. I mean, they're as smart as any bird. They're really not dumb.
Like simple mathematic equations and things like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, there's some
play
wild stuff
tic-tac-toe
going on.
in Las Vegas too.
Oh yeah.
I could play tic-tac-toe versus chicken. You put money in there and very.
Oh really?
I mean, 90% of tic-tac-toe games end in a draw. But there. I was listening to this podcast with David Chang, who's a chef, in New York. Interesting guy. Maybe it was a TV show he did, and he was talking about how every culture, Koreans, Deep South, they do fried chicken. There's some kind of like, subcontinent of India, they have a fried chicken dish. Africa, all these different countries in Africa do fried chicken in a different way. And his sort of layman's argument was like, primitive people looked around and said, like, this animal walking on the ground, because it couldn't fly, looked like easier food. Whereas like to go and kill a woolly mammoth, like it's going to take 2 or 3 of us. We're going to have to craft some weapons. Might not taste that good. And it's like, it could kill us. Whereas like a chicken, it's not going to kill you. I mean, maybe it'd peck you to death. I've never heard of a human being being killed by a chicken, but it has a lot of things like against it because it's so defenseless. In the wild, like it had no chance in the wild.
Yeah, but they had really complicated civilizations long before we were around, in the jungles, and I mean, like 50 million years ago,
right?
The earliest chickens, and they had generational systems and partnerships and
Well, you still see this with geese and birds that can fly long distances and escape mankind altogether, especially down in the Antarctic, right? Like they have complex civilizations there, massive breeding populations, and because they have no predators, right? So that's something I wanted to ask you about is this book, when you're teaching literature to ninth graders, they learn man versus nature, man versus man versus man versus himself. In a way, in this book, the man it's the evil people, right? Like the people are the bad guys, and is that how you see humans as on the same level as animals, or people that should be like a noble class of people who are smarter than most animals and know then not to go and create these huge factory farms. It's not really a question, but I was trying to make it one.
well no, I have things to say about that. No, I do think that the thing that I started thinking about when I was looking so hard into chickens, and I mean I did a huge amount of research, years worth of research.
That really comes through.
I mean, I embedded. I did undercover stuff. I mean, I visited so many farms. I did all kinds of stuff, and I got to know undercover investigators extremely well. And the one thing that I kept coming back to is how similar chickens are really to us in so many ways. Like that we also once were nomadic and, living in all different kinds of strange climates, exposed to the elements. And that we also, that we, in many ways, we're pretty vulnerable, even though we learned to use our hands and stuff. And now the way that we live is so different from that. Like we are so unfree compared to how we were then. Not that necessarily we would want to go back to that, but just if you compare, I mean, how chickens live in these little tiny cages and like they have like pieces of their face like cut off and stuff in order to not peck each other to death. And I mean, if you think about how we live, crammed into our small spaces, and we put these, uncomfortable shoes on our feet all day, and we like walk from one box to another to like do our work, and then walk back to our little box, or we walk to a different box to get a few boxes to take home with us. And I mean, it's just like, and we wear like masks on our faces, or, I mean, it's like, there's, we have created our own prison. Like this is a barn. We live in a barn. The United States is a barn. I mean, the whole world is just this giant barn, and we are burning it down. And that really struck me the more that I was researching chickens. And so it's like, saving the chickens, it's not just saving the chickens. It's like, like, can we even just do that one thing? Like just stop burning our barn down? No.
Well, and you really put to rest a lot of the mythology around the idea of like free range chicken. Like that sort of a marketing term come up by these factory farms to make people think that these chickens are free. Like it's got the word free in it, right? It's like free range. They're free. They're ranging around. Like that sounds great. But the reality of that is they're still on these factory farms. Like even if it's free range, they're just still in a box, and they're, live in darkness and there's huge fans. And, I wanted to ask you, say you did all this.
And the shit.
Just pit, right? The shit pit.
Oh my pit. God, you have no idea. Oh my God.
Do you want to describe for people listening at home of how this works? So there's a grate, right? Like all the shit just goes straight down. You've seen it. You tell us.
Well, I mean, there's different kinds of barns, and but there's one of them. Like a pit. There's a pit barn where they put like an A-frame cage system, and then as the birds shit, the shit just kind of drops through
cascades like plinko, like
and then it goes into like a huge open room underneath that they call the pit, and it just fills over the course of the life of the birds, and the birds are in there for like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. And so until the whole thing is just full of shit. And then finally they take the birds out, and then they clean out the shit pit. And it's like so much shit. I mean, I went and I saw it. And I also saw, like, I talked to undercover investigators whose job it was to like shovel walkways through the shit pit. It's just so bad.
It's really ghastly.
Really horrible.
In fact, you were gonna read a passage for us from Barn 8, and I think it involves something related to this topic. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I do.
Would
It's
now
just
be a
like
good time
page
for that,
and a
Deb?
half. Sure, I could do that.
Okay, awesome.
So in this moment, the one of the investigators, he's like walking on one of these farms, and he's walking from barn 3 to barn 4, and he walks through it, and one of his shoes presses down onto the dirt and into the shit, because there's all of this shit in the fields around the barns too. Chicken shit. In this business, it was once a valuable commodity, sold as fertilizer in a competitive market, an extra dime for the farmhands. Phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, everybody's happy. But the nation's number of hens squared and squared and squared, and their shit squared with them. Supply left demand behind decades ago. 150,000 hens makes 2,000 tons of manure a year. On a farm such as this, the farmer has to contend with 16,000 tons of shit before Christmas. Meanwhile, chemical fertilizer has become cheap and is a hell of a lot easier than hauling around thousands of tons of shit. Farmers pay for their shit to be carried away and put into landfills. Some of it winds up in our waterways. Some is spread out in the fields around the chicken farms as a sort of super fertilization. That shit sinks into the earth over a period of years, and more is spread over it, tamping down the shit beneath it to form a thick crust of chicken shit to stay for all time. Now, the heel of Dill's shoe pressed down onto one piece of shit in particular. That shit, a bit denser than most shit due to the mysteries of biology, pushed past the shit around it and sank. It continued to sink bit by bit through the other shit over days and months and years until it arrived at the pre-farm dirt. From there, its slight heft began a slow, historic, then post-historic descent. As the earth made its rotation, as the planets moved on their sky tracks, as humans raised and lowered their civilizations, the shit traveled 1/100th of a millimeter at a time farther below the surface of the world, sucked by gravity, until it broke free into the cavern of the water table. It drifted down through the soft mud, landed on the bottom, and kept going, grinding through tertiary layers, chalk, carbon. Finally, one day, this extraordinary piece of shit stuck fast in the Paleozoic era, its cellular makeup joining its ancestors and imprinting a fossil into the rock. Far above the shit in the shifting sky, the stars were the only objects humans could see and not destroy. They could destroy not only the sight of them, which they were doing dot by dot, the stars blinking out over the planet, dimmed by human light, but from where the investigators were that night, they could still look up and see some, and Dill did before entering barn 4.
It's fucking beautiful.
That's so great.
It's one of my favorite parts. I really love that description, and it makes me think. I wanted to ask you about the kind of the structure of this novel, because we described it, we summarized it as it sounds pretty linear, but there are a lot of moving parts in this book. There are a lot of pieces, that are kind of like that little set piece, but then there's some pieces that are flashbacks from other characters. And I wanted to ask you how you went about structuring this and piecing it together. It sounds like you do a lot of revising when you write. Did you have a lot of raw material to work with? And then how did you kind of shape it into this story?
I mean, I think it was like a little piece like that would be that I was just doing research and I was just so stunned by how much shit was involved that then I would just sort of stop and just write that little, 300 to 600 word piece. I mean, another thing is that I wrote a piece for Harper's on the egg industry. And so I had to do even way more research than I maybe even might have done, for the book. But I mean, I became obsessed. So I even did way more research than I even would have had to do for the Harper's piece. I mean, so the more that I researched, the more just weird little things I discovered, and the more weird people there were to talk to. And, the investigators themselves are such interesting people. And and the farmers are really interesting people as well. And so what I would do is I would just write these little pieces. And then that's all I did for like a couple of years. And I was also working on the book of stories that came out, and I was also working on a graphic novel at the same time. So I wasn't really trying to put the novel together. And then finally I was like, okay, now I got to figure out who these people are, who are the characters, like, how am I going to put all this together?
And we should say this book was published right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we send you our condolences for everyone who published a book during COVID. And I think one of your events at Book People was like one of their last in-person events, if not the last one.
Yeah, it was like the second to last or something.
Just terrible for, writers who are trying to get publicity for their work, and we're like, I'm going to go on tour, and it's like, no, you're not.
I had like 29 events planned or something, like crazy.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, all over the place,
like all over the U.S.
Crazy.
Yeah. What was the pub date of this book? Was it?
I think it was March 3rd. No, yeah, it was March 3rd. So I did the March 3rd event. Yeah. But then there was AWP started the next day, and everyone was like, geez, are you going? I don't think so. Are you going? I don't think so. So they started canceling. So I was supposed to have, a big thing at AWP, didn't do that. And then I was supposed to leave for my book tour on March 13th. And it was
That's the day they announced COVID at UT. I remember the president's wife.
March 11th, my bag was packed. I'm like, geez, I don't know. And then I'm talking to my editor. He's like, I don't know. I think you could go. I'm like, I don't know. And he was like, well, maybe just don't do the one in New York. I'm sure that like, if you just don't do the one in New York on March 13th, then probably by March 14th, you can do the one it was crazy. So then we were like, okay.
That's so funny in hindsight, hey?
I know. It's so funny. So then like every day we canceled like one more event. And finally, and then they were rescheduling them. They were like, surely by April. Right. It was like, surely by May.
Yeah, April 2022, we might be okay, hopefully.
I mean, I remember in Austin, it was to me a wake up call when they canceled South by Southwest, and I was like, oh shit, that's a big deal here.
This is for keeps. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you actually about the pandemic, because the chicken industry has been in the news because of a lot of COVID restrictions about not just vaccine mandates, but originally COVID spreading through like Tyson chicken plants and, the workers trying to get solidarity. Is there, it actually made me think of like you bringing attention to this whole industry in some way. Maybe you've been asked about this before in the past, is the Jungle, the meatpacking book.
Yeah, I love that book.
And really, did you have that in mind when you're talking about, shining a light on a whole industry?
I mean, I didn't really think about that much, because my book is really funny all the way through. And I mean, that book, I love that book, but that book is like it's like a communist tract, it's like, it's about communism.
There's no humor. Really. No humor.
It's not funny. And it's really, it's not, it was it was intended to be like an advertisement for communism. And I really love it. It's such a weird book. Like if you've read it recently, it's very strange the way narratively it goes. But I mean, I think I was thinking more about books like Catch 22, maybe like Vonnegut, or like who else was I thinking about? There's a story by George Saunders about it's called like 92330 or something, and it's about a monkey who is being experimented on and given massive amounts of a dangerous medication. But it's really funny, and it's really, really dark and sad. So there's
that rings a bell.
yeah.
And I read, or maybe it was another interview you did, that people had asked you about the Edward Abbey, because there's direct action in this, right? Like Liberation Front, Monkey Wrench Gang stuff. But that's not something you had read, right? Is that correct?
No, I still haven't read it, and I'm so glad you reminded me, because I've definitely got to read that book.
I think there's a lot of similarities of, kind of a gang of people saying, voting, signing petitions. That's all well and good, but we're the part of the organization that is going to go out and actually stop this from happening. And I think that that's kind of the impulse that starts, with characters in your book about they start actually by stealing one chicken, right? Or taking, and it seems really easy, right? Like just take a chicken. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think getting back to your point about the pandemic, I mean, so I think that, when I was talking about how chickens started to remind me so much of humans and the human predicament, and I feel also, being a vegan, part of my deeply held spiritual beliefs is that we're all connected and that we're all equal. And, maybe that sounds like a crazy person, but it's just how I feel. It's just what I believe. And so I do think that we've created this world where we just feel like we just fucking own everything. Like we humans, we own everything. We own each other. We own the air. We own certainly any animal. We own the water, and we can kill everything in it that we want. We own the stars. We just own everything. And I don't think we own anything. I think we own nothing. And we certainly don't own any other living beings. We do not have the right to just create all of these living beings and then just slaughter them however we want to do it. Like we have no right to do that. And so I think it's like I really wanted to just kind of, I just really wanted to have that on the page, just show that on the page. And that I do feel like that's kind of connected to the pandemic, because it is, like the pandemic came out of this wild animal that was taken out of a forest and brought to a market where it's like enslaved and put in a cage and then killed. And it's like, why do we think that's okay? I can't understand why people think that that's okay.
Yeah, this seems like something you've been thinking about for a while, because even in Vacation from 2008, you've got a character who's the dolphin untrainer, formerly a dolphin trainer, converts to like a more humane perspective about encaging these beautiful animals. And so your work seems to me to be indwelt with the sense of animal kinship and animal protectionism, protecting them from the ruin of human exploitation. So you've done that like really in a grand en masse way with Barn 8, but it's early in your work too that you've sort of had this sensibility. Is that something that's always been a part of your kind of outlook on the world, or has it become more aggressive towards that through the research that you specifically did for Barn 8, or what's sort of the trajectory of that?
So that dolphin untrainer, that was Rick O'Barry. That was that piece of the book was just straight autobiography, because I was in Nicaragua, and I wound up on this island,
Was it
and
Corn Island?
I was on Corn Island,
Okay.
yeah, because I went to
Featured in the
Bluefields,
book. Yeah, okay.
and it was horrible. Like it had just been through, there had been a horrible hurricane, and I was really, I was like sick, like I had dysentery, and I
Oh my
just
gosh, really?
yeah, I was really
Oh
sick,
no.
and I just wanted some vacation at that point. I'm like, I just want like I want to see like some ocean and some sea, like I want to see some sky and some sun, like just please. So I went to Corn Island, and it turned out that there were no bank machines on the island, and they didn't take credit cards, and I had no money. And I wound up in this little tiny hut, and all the way at the end, and then I'm sitting in this little hut, and I'm going to have to fly back soon because I don't have any money, and um and this man is walking toward me, and it's like he's like shining, he's full of light, and I couldn't understand what was happening, and he approached, and it turned out that he was this guy who had come there with his wife, who was there to untrain these dolphins and bring them back, and it turned out that it was Rick O'Barry, who is kind of he's famous for doing this, and there's been documentaries about him, and he's written a lot of books, and he was a dolphin trainer for many, many years, and then he just like changed his mind, and is now would like steal in the middle of the night, steal these dolphins and untrain them and release them. And so I stayed with them all week, and then they invited me on the dolphin release.
No
so
way.
I went on the release with them. Okay. And it was exactly like I wrote it. I just wrote it down exactly like it happened. I wrote it down like the day after it happened, and then
there was a huge storm that hit your boat
a
while you were
huge
doing
storm.
it? Oh my
there
gosh.
was like a hurricane. It was crazy. Whoa. And we barely made it back, and we like it happened just like that, just like it in the book. But yeah, and then I chose to put it at the end.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be, but I became a vegan like a year later or something. Like I wasn't a vegan yet, but obviously I was thinking about it.
Sure. Yeah. And then you went back to New York and followed a strange man around for months and months at a time as well.
That
was that part
is all made up.
autobiographical
No,
too?
that's all made up.
There's like serious, like it gave me like this really warm recollection of reading City of Glass by Paul Auster in the first installment of the New York trilogy, where he just follows he's detective, and he follows that man around who just seems to be making like a random pattern, but it turns out he's writing Tower of Babel with his walking pattern. Have you read that? Is that
no,
yeah.
But I remember when Vacation came out, people were like, "Have you read?" Like I always missed the one. I missed it.
Your book
same
is way
with the
better.
Monkey Wrench
Your
game.
book is way better. I want to.
I mean, that's the only parallel, is just someone following someone else around New York. So it's not, don't worry, like infringing any intellectual properties or anything.
So we promised you no questions about David Foster Wallace, but I mentioned to you before that I did think of the essay Consider the Lobster several times when I was reading this, because it asks a lot of these same questions, but about an animal that is much, I would say not much, but a little harder to love, which seems to have very little in the way of humor or personalities, which is a crustacean. And he kind of questions a lot of the same things. It says, well, let's really question that. Maybe it does have personality. Maybe it does have nerve endings. Maybe it's more sensitive to temperature changes. And he really gets into a lot of research too about the lobster. And in the end of it, he's not really able to justify his eating of the lobster, but he still does eat the lobster, partly for whatever reason. But I want to ask you one, if you read that essay, and some of those questions about sort of trading one's gustatory pleasure for another being.
Sentient,
yeah. I love that essay so much. It's such a great essay. Consider the Lobster. It was in his second book of big essays, right? It was. Wasn't it called Consider the Lobster? Yeah, it was the title. Yeah. And I first read that essay probably before I was a vegan. I always read the David Foster Wallace books as they came out, So I can't remember what year that one came out. Do you remember?
2004.
Yeah, so I didn't become a vegan, I think, until 2007 or something, maybe 2008 even. So, but I loved that essay. I thought it was, and yeah, when I went back and looked at it after I was a vegan, I was so shocked by just how moving it was and how he really went there, he really convinced you. I mean, no one could read that essay and not feel,
Yeah.
Moved by the fact that, like, there's a moment where he talks about looking out at this place and suddenly seeing it as this like horror show of people who are you know like just eating these living bodies, like just killing them right
It's like
there.
a Roman
and,
circus,
like a Roman circus. That was what he called it, a Roman circus. Yeah. And then and then he just decided, oh, just fuck it, like I'm just gonna just go ahead and eat it up. And I get that, I'm not saying that like I'm perfect, I fly, I'm not saying that. It's just like once I've made the step of, yeah, no, I don't think I can eat that, then there's no way I could ever eat it again.
Yeah, I think an interesting question that came up for me reading that was like, what, almost like, where's the line between not just humans and more human-like animals, but where's the line between animals and things that have an interest in not being eaten, right? Right.
Like plants.
Well, yeah, like let's say a sea urchin looks like a plant. Technically, it's an animal, or certain like sea sponges, right? Like very fine line. Coral. Where is their interest in, staying alive? A mouse has an interest in not being stepped on. It will try to avoid being stepped on. But like a rock doesn't. This very philosophical thing that he gets into of like what defines, like where is the line between, an oyster, a barnacle, and like, how can you have sympathy for, if an oyster doesn't have an interest in being eaten, it wants to stay alive and reproduce, and maybe it has a complex society, but like what a rock doesn't, like, you know what I mean? Like, where's the line between this
levels of sentience?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Just even questioning that at all is partly what you're doing with chickens, right? Because a lot of people don't even see them as having any kind of feelings or emotions or life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it is really hard to make that choice. Like, you have to just draw the line. I mean, I read The Overstory.
Oh, Richard Powers. Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, I love that book
Trees.
so much. Yeah, and then suddenly it's like I'm looking around at the trees. I'm like, man, we have screwed them, but good. I mean, as you just, as you kind of think about the kinds of organisms that they were these whole, also like civilizations, like families that were just like spread across the world,
sharing
and
nutrients and cooperating under the earth. And I listened to some of his Bookworm episode recently.
Did you read the book?
Re-aired. I haven't read it yet, but
I mean,
it's on
we
my
basically
list.
exterminated the American chestnut
great.
tree, and there's this long list of like species that have gone extinct since the year 1900, and really it's only getting worse for like land mammals, the whaling industry. I mean, it's really bleak.
It's so bleak. Dave, you have to read that book. I can't believe you haven't read that book.
It won the Pulitzer Prize.
So good.
I'm ashamed.
It's so good.
It happens to me every time we sit down to record. I just feel shame.
Powers has written a bunch about this subject, and I think what interests me is this kind of predictably irrational behavior on the part of human beings, right? That it's irrational, that someone, in some sense, it's not a problem of even education or understanding of facts, that it's a problem of empathy, or it's a problem.
Yeah, it is.
It's a problem of being willing to overcome your sort of inherent biases. And that is where I think the novelist can do some work that, what you're saying with the jungle, just like communist propaganda, is not going to do. He's not trying.
But that book did a lot. That book did a lot, but it didn't do what he wanted it to do. Like he wanted that book to create empathy for the worker, but it did not. What it did was it resulted in people being horrified by the conditions under which their food was being packaged and wanting it to be cleaner.
And you brought in these government auditors, which are like in your book, right? And there's something about the sterility of the farm system that, in a way, that's what people wanted, right? That was the end result, was let's make it more mechanical, more government inspected. But then that is not really the solution, right? Like, I mean, in a way, what you're proposing here is like the solution is to take the roof off of the building and like, let them go free, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm just reading from my notes. I'm just trying to summarize what I have here. But I mean, I will, we'll address it really quickly because I mean, like, we're not a vegan podcast, right? You're probably part of your core audience, which is like you're writing for non-vegans here. You're not preaching to the choir.
Yeah, totally.
And
I don't even know if we've ever talked about like eating meat or not on this show, Matt. This might be a first.
Probably.
We're just delving.
And
most of the time, I've only done one other podcast where I talked a lot about this. In fact, I mean, one other literary podcast where, and it turned out that the guy who was interviewing me was vegan. He just happened to also be like a literary guy, and he had a literary podcast. And then while we were talking, he started asking me all these questions, and I got a little worried. I was like, look, I'm not like a crazy animal rights activist, although I totally am. And he was like, and so then, but this right now, what we're doing is, it's interesting to me that we're talking so much about it because usually people don't ask about that. Usually the literary people do not ask about that. They talk about like the characters and stuff like that.
I think it's what the book is about. And so like, why would you, obviously you would want to talk about it.
Pretty hard to get around.
Yeah. When I think that, if you're writing this book from this perspective, like that's the core of the story, is really, why are they doing this? I think vegans often get a bad reputation. I've never read too many other like animal liberation books, although now that I say that, I'm like, shit, maybe I have.
Eating Animals by Foer. Have you read that?
I have not. I kind of find him annoying.
I read that.
So
yeah, I know you do.
I would say I have read a writer who I really recommended in the past named Abby Jinney, who writes a lot about the relationship between humans and animals. And, I think that's really also at the heart of your book, is really the relationship between humans and animals, because it's not just about liberating them. It's like, okay, you're not just saying like, okay, liberate them, go put them in like a nature preserve. Like, humans still have to live on this planet too. And, there's mutual cooperation in things. And there's a lot of different characters you bring in here, and I still have questions for you about some of those people, the evil humans, who are in here. One we haven't talked about is Dill. We haven't talked about Dill or Jonathan, who both I like in their own sort of fucked up way. And Dill, I want to ask you right off the bat, like, is that a reference to Kill Mockingbird? Dill.
Oh, that's so interesting. No. Okay, so first of all, one thing I tried really hard to do in the book was to not have any evil humans. Like, even the farmers are pretty sympathetic.
Totally fair.
Yeah,
totally fair.
And
that's true.
So every single person, I mean, and that when I started writing the book, I thought I was going to have a book full of like evil farmers and like heroic, perfect activists, and that's not at all. Once I started researching it and getting to know these people, that was all turned on its head. I mean, I spent a lot of time with the farmers, and they were wonderful people with their own like quirks and just interesting. They were just interesting and fun to hang out with. And I went out, had drinks with them and, did shots of whiskey. And I mean, it was really great. I like, okay, they did not know that I was a vegan,
Activist.
or that they had no idea.
Gonna write a big takedown.
Yeah, they had no idea. But we did, I mean, and then, but even after they did find out, they were just, I just liked them, there was, and they had their reasons. I wouldn't say every single one had their reasons, but, I mean, for these guys, like, it's a family business. Their great grandparents were doing this. And, so they feel like they are, and they just don't believe that chickens have like feelings or that they have sentience. We just happen to disagree. So I wound up not making the farmers villains. And then as I got to know the undercover investigators, I really, really liked them all. They were really fun, but they were crazy. I mean, crazy to a man and woman. And so
Just in what they're willing to do,
flawed.
or like how they got to that point in life.
No. Yeah. Like just people with problems, people with big problems. I mean, you have to have it's a very difficult life to live, and to do it for more than a few months, you've got to be crazy. So, crazy is a big word. You have to be committed in a way that society just kind of looks at you and just doesn't understand what went wrong. And they're complicated people. So they wound up being very flawed in the book. So I wound up having just like characters that were flawed, that were heroic, that were, farmers and not farmers, just all different kinds. And I was glad that happened.
Well, and I didn't mean to take that out of context. I was quoting from the very last paragraph of the book, which is way in an epilogue, way, into the future, speculating about way into the future where, chickens will not be alone. The evil humans will be gone for good. Chickens, like you said, 55 million years ago, there were, this whole reconsideration of even what dinosaurs are. There's a lot of research now that says actually they all had feathers. And, our belief in that dinosaurs looked like lizards is really based on, science that's 100 years old. And they were pretty much all various types of birds with very ancient species of animals.
That's right. And they went tweet. I mean, my dad always says that dinosaurs went tweet, tweet. That the noise they made was tweet, tweet, not roar.
I think that there's a lot of...
Tell that to my 4-year-old. She'd love it.
I think that there's a lot of evidence that that's the truth. So I think that's where I was quoting it, is like, in a way that is about climate change, because like humans, like you said, we're burning up the planet, destroying our own environment. The whole ecosystems are collapsing. But in the end, like surely some of these birds will survive. They don't need us, right?
I hope that's right. That's why I made those radioactive birds in the book.
They could outlive everyone. Right?
Yeah. Wait, I just have to ask a side question. Dave, don't you have a new baby?
Yeah. 6 weeks old.
Oh, 6 weeks old.
Yeah, 6 weeks. So that's new since the last time we recorded, Matt. This is the first recording.
That's right.
That I've had 2 children now. And maybe why this episode's a little bit more delayed than it otherwise would have been.
So David's got a long road ahead of him. My youngest is 11. And I remember when he was born in 2010, of thinking like, okay, if he lives to be 90, he's the only one of us probably that's got a shot at seeing the year 2100. Like a whole new, like the century turnover again. It's like maybe my youngest, if he lives to be 90. But now with your kid he would only have to be 79. He can see it.
That
seems doable.
Likely.
Yeah. So that's pretty exciting.
It depends on how environmental disaster stuff shakes out in the next 80 years, but it seems maybe possible.
See
hopefully
the year 2100.
There was that article that came out recently that having children now is like an act of radical hope. It was New York Times or something. And that's sort of what it feels like to have a kid in 2021 during a pandemic. It's like, yeah, this has to be nothing more than I believe that we will get through this somehow, that the human race will get through this somehow.
I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning when we were talking about, the most shitty question you can ask a writer, like, where do you get your ideas? About use this word initia. Did you make that word up? Is this a made up word, like initial?
Is that Latin?
Like initial, but without
I don't
the
know
L?
if I made it up.
I like this.
There are all kinds of weird words that I use that I don't know if I made them up or not.
I like this word.
And that's one of them.
That's good.
I like this word.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an initial idea, but just boiled down to even further to an initial.
And to like a glimpse of a moment of an image or something.
That
I've been using it for a long time.
that's really fascinating. I want to go ask you another question about chickens, which is any other like cool facts. Like you put a lot of cool facts into the book, but just for people who are listening, like some of the surprising things you learned about chickens.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see here. I don't know. I mean, I think that the things that really surprised me were what close friends they have with each other. And also the other thing was like how you can be such close friends with a chicken, which I started to notice once I started spending time at this sanctuary that I lived near at the time. And how they'll like follow you around and they'll like, perch on your lap and they'll like try to take your, like how like parrots will try to like steal your pens and stuff and stick their face in your peanut butter or whatever. Like chickens are like that too. I mean, they're very warm and friendly. And so that was the thing that surprised me the most about them. But I mean, I was really starting from zero. I mean, I didn't even know, I had kind of forgotten that they needed a rooster to fertilize them. I mean, I'm sure I learned that in grade school, but when I started this, I was like really surprised. I was like, why is it with all those eggs sitting around that they don't have any chicks? Right. That was seriously a question when I first started.
Well, and what a problem it is with chicken sexing, right? And
yeah, it's really sad.
They hire people to separate out chicks, and it's actually really hard for untrained people, I should say, to even identify male from female chickens when they're first hatched. But that happens a lot with backyard chickens, where take home 6, and then guess what? You got one of them as a rooster. What are you going to do with that one? Because if you have the rooster around, you're not going to have any backyard eggs.
Right. Right.
I want to ask you one other question about kind of at a craft level, the sound of certain sentences. It seems like to me a lot of this book and a lot of your work in general can be read aloud or is meant to be read aloud or is written originally almost like a transcript. And I wanted to ask you, how do you go about that? Do you read your work aloud before you edit it? Do you record things into a recorder? Like, what's some of your methodology there?
No, I never do that. I just have to hear it in my head, and a piece isn't done until I've heard it in my head. So, like, just last night, I was editing just a really short, like a short. It was just like 600 words or something, and I just kept reading it again and again, and it was just like the stresses just were not falling in the right place for some of the sentences, and some of the words just didn't feel like fun enough. They just didn't feel fun. They just felt like plain old words.
It's kind of boring.
And
it's kind of boring.
Yeah, like it would go in and out. There would be like sing song, sing song, sing song, and then clonk, 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 and then sing song, clonk, clonk. So I have to go in there and just like, I can't stop working on the piece until I get the clonk clonks out. This all happened with Gertrude Stein. I was like a Gertrude Stein freak. And actually, really what happened was I was not a Gertrude Stein freak, but someone told me that they really loved, and a writer I admired said that she really loved Gertrude Stein. So I took some books out by her, and I didn't understand them at all. Like, had no understanding what was happening. And a neighbor who'd been upstairs was like playing his music really loud. So I pounded on I went upstairs and I pounded on the door and I said, shut up. Like, I'm trying to read some Gertrude Stein here, I'm trying to be a writer, And he was like, oh, I have a recording of her. I was like, really? So he's like, come in. So he played this recording of her, and it was so interesting because as she read, I suddenly understood the work. Like she was recording a sound that she heard that I don't hear. Like, it was the sound of her own mind, or like the sound of like the rhythm of the world that she sees. Like, she looks out at the world and she sees a rhythm. Just like I look out at the world and I see a rhythm, but like our rhythms don't match. So in order for me to hear her rhythm, she has to write her words. And then if I can read them right, then I can hear her rhythm. And then we can be much closer. And it's not about content. It's just about sound, It's not about plot. It's just about like sound. It's not about ideas. It's like, how close can I be to you? That's how close I want you to be to me. I want you to hear the rhythm of what I hear, like the rhythm of my experience and my brain.
It's amazing because you really jumped over the wall of another person, because now you probably looked at that guy with the record a little bit different too. You could hear his sound. Sure. Maybe he had a little mutual respect after that. Like, no, not really.
A little bit. Just a little.
Well, yes.
Depends what record he was playing.
You have such a unique voice, though. Even in your stories, from your novel to your memoir, there's something very recognizable across that. And in fact, when I first read the beginning of Revolution, I wasn't sure that this was, I just assumed it was a novel. It reads like a novel to me. And that I had never read a memoir written in that way. I mean, I read a lot of other memoirs, but a lot of them are very, I would say, focused on, I'm going to tell this great story. And yours, it just read like you were creating these characters. So I find that voice, it really does work. Whatever that, getting the clunk clunk out of your sentences, I could feel that in the memoir as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like, like, I don't know if you like the artist Giacometti.
Oh yeah.
I mean, everyone likes Giacometti, right?
Stick figures.
Yeah, he does the little stick figure guys, the walking man, and
the sculptures.
And the standing woman.
Yeah.
So there's this great book by, I mean, of course everyone loves him, but there's this great book by James Lord where he talks about sitting for Giacometti for a portrait. And it's called the Giacometti Portrait. And so he told Giacometti that he was going to, he only had like the weekend because he had to leave for New York on Monday. So he could do a portrait of him, but just for 2 days. So he comes, he does the portrait. Giacometti's like, this is great, come back tomorrow, finishes, and then on the second day, he's like, oh, actually, you have to come back tomorrow because I'm not done. And Giacometti's like, I don't know, it looks kind of the same as it did yesterday. He's like, sorry, you have to change your plane ticket. So he changes his plane ticket and he stays an extra couple days. He paints and he paints and he paints and he paints. And then he's like, I'm sorry, I'm not done. You have to stay
Extend.
Longer. So he keeps coming back and he keeps coming back, and he's got like a wife and like a new daughter at home in New York, and he's like wants to leave, but he's like, Giacometti's like making him stay. And he keeps at the end of each day, Giacometti keeps looking at, James Lord keeps looking at it, and he's like, it kind of looks the same and you're only working on one piece of it, just like the same little round part of my head. I mean, what's happening? You have to let me out of here. And he said, the book is so interesting because he talks about feeling like just completely overwhelmed with just terror, and that he might never get to leave Paris, that he might just always have to keep coming back and sitting for him. And then his brother,
nightmare.
yeah, and finally his brother Diego comes in, and he's like, James is like, what am I going to do? I got to get out of here. And he's like, he's always like this. When he builds those standing men, I have to run in and grab them, because he'll like chisel and chisel and chisel and chisel and chisel until it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, until it's just like a little speck, and then he taps it and it's gone. So he runs in and grabs it. And that the whole time he's just saying, like, I'm trying to just recreate what I see in my head. Like, I want you to see the thing that I have in my head. And anyway, it's just another way of saying the Gertrude Stein thing is like, the difficulty of trying to get the thing out that's in my head, like onto the page, and that it's never about like the plot, really. It's never about whatever it is, like the story. Like when I was writing Revolution, I was thinking about that a lot. And I was thinking about how it's not about me going to Central America to join the revolution, when I was 18. Like, that is the story. But it's also just like, it's about like the form. It's about memory and time, and like how like time misrepresents itself and in our minds. And it's about the sound of who I was then versus the sound of who I am now, or the sound of who I was when I was writing that book.
Right.
And that sounds like a cliche to say this, but that's sort of what makes it like a universal experience for the reader. And you can be inside of another person's head, which is, I think, one of the only things you can do originally in literature.
The imaginative access to other selves idea.
But your story about Gertrude Stein reminds me, there's a famous story where Picasso did a portrait of Gertrude Stein, and someone told Picasso, she doesn't really look like that, and Picasso said, don't worry, she will.
Oh my God, I forgot that.
There's so many great, Gertrude Stein's quotes that were coming up when you were talking about her, because I love her work. And like you said, it has to be, it's all about this voice. In a way, it has to be read aloud to kind of get it at first. She says, there's one quote, she says, I love a view, but I love to sit with my back to it.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I just love this idea that there's, the work of the genius is really to do nothing, or to sit around, like what you're describing with Giacometti. It's like, he's a fucking genius, but in a way, he's either doing something extremely repetitive and just, carving it down. I remember there's a story too about Giacometti where he is working in some residency and he was very depressed and he was in a bad mood. And by the time he had started these huge boulders, and he left the residency with them in a matchbox. Like, he had carved him down into two little tiny little sticks that were just in a matchbox. But that,
he was like, here is my art.
It's here. It's in this little thing. They're like, can't sell that, dude. But
I know we wanted to talk about your teaching a little bit,
Deb,
and what you do at the University of Texas at Austin and with Penn City Writers. How do you take some of the stuff that you're talking about and engage students with this is how to write compelling writing? Like, how do you get in there with students to convey this stuff, and to like, what kind of exercises do you do, and like, what is your pedagogy around getting students to get to this kind of place that you're talking about, of like real communion with the reader?
It just kind of depends, like if I'm teaching, like which level I'm teaching. It's really different at the prison as it is at at the university. At the university, I teach undergrads and graduate students. And with the undergrads, a lot of times, like if they're just, if I just really feel like they're not being specific enough, I'll just say, okay, everybody just describe the ceiling and just start writing. Describe the ceiling. And they're all just sitting there looking up at the ceiling and like trying to like describe the ceiling, And then I'm like, now that is how I want you to write. And then, if I see it again, describe the floor this time, so it's about like getting them yeah. So, but yeah, the prison's really different. The prison is a very different experience of teaching. Yeah, it's a maximum security prison. And I was working on Barn 8 when I started teaching there. And, so there's something about, just about like seeing all these people living in cages for their whole, for so many, in Texas, these guys, they're in prison for decades. And a lot of them, they went in when they were 18, 19. I have one student who's been in prison since he was 14. And
how old do you know?
I think now he's like 30, 31 maybe. But he doesn't come up for parole for
so half his life.
I think he has like a 45 years before he can go up for parole from when he was at 14.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what, 60 or something.
Wow.
And so
what made you want to get involved in that?
Gonna...
What drove you to do that?
So my dad was involved in like prison advocacy, and then when I used to teach I was a professor at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which is actually one reason why I became friends. I already knew Jessica Anthony, who I love, and I love her writing so much.
Same here. We love it.
She's fantastic.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so anyway, they had a prison program, so I just taught in that. And then when I moved here, they didn't have one, so I just decided to just start one. And I was going to just start one at the local jail, and then I met with this activist who said, you should go to one of those places where they don't have classes. And I was like, okay, you pick one. So he picked this one, and I've been going there all these years.
One of our former guests too, my friend Chris Piekarski, he taught in prison, and he now teaches rhetoric at UT. He did a PhD there on David Foster Wallace and Buddhism in 2011, 2010.
Cool.
So if you're looking for people with experience teaching in prisons at UT, I should let him know. He would love it.
He sounds like such an interesting guy.
He is an interesting guy.
He's cool.
He was on our early episodes of our show.
Like 14 or something, Buddhism. I think.
But the comparison between, people locked up, all of these animals locked up in cages, that definitely came to mind. When I was reading this, I feel like there was a comparison there between, lack of hope,
human incarceration,
and in a way, there's way fewer people trying to bust people out of jail due to especially in Texas, like there's a big criminal justice like lock up more people. We need more prisons, and rather than trying to get rid of prisons. How do you see those two issues? Maybe I'm conflating two things that don't really belong.
No, they talk, the guys at the prison talk a lot about, feeling, feeling like caged animals. They are in cages, and the prison looks like a giant cage. So, yeah, I think it's a very painful reality. It's a very, very painful thing to witness. Because the thing is, those guys are totally alive. They're so smart. They read like crazy. They just they read so much more than any of my students, and they write like mad, and they're like interested in everything, and they have futures. Their brains are open enough that they could just do so much. It's a waste.
Mm-hmm. So what is the nature of the program that you do there? Like, what is, are you doing like duration classes? Are you working with the same students for years on end? Like, what kind of stuff, what kind of work are they producing? Like,
I have to just kind of keep changing it. Originally, the idea was I was just going to teach this one little workshop, just show up once a month and just, come on down, but
Yeah,
it has
just creative writing workshop.
yeah, but it has
Yeah.
changed. It has grown. It changes to suit what's happening. And then like for a while it was like a 2-year, then like a 3-year program, where after that time you leave. But then then it's like, so there's one college class at the whole place, and then the poor guy, he finishes, and then what? He's just back in population and he doesn't get to be in the class anymore. So I can't do that. So then I just let them stay, and we just they just hang out, and they're brilliant, and then they train other ones, and they run like beginning classes. Like once they've been in the class for a few years, they start sort of getting other students ready to join by like doing like doing like beginning classes and stuff. And then we have like a small art program. Oh my God, we're gonna do an art show at a gallery at UT.
Wow.
And yeah, next semester you got to come.
That's very exciting.
And we are and then we have this amazing, we built our own library inside the prison. We have the Penn City Writers Library, and then each student is matched to people outside the prison who are reading books with them. So they read books and they write letters back and forth.
Can we do that, or how do we get involved?
We
with that?
need some new people. We really
how
do,
do people sign up for
they're
this?
reading. You just tell me.
Okay.
You just write me. Just write me. You too should do it. It's so much fun. It's like so rewarding.
That sounds great.
Nobody ever quits. Everyone wants to just keep doing it. It's like, because you get a letter once a month from someone who's incarcerated, and it's like, I read this book by David Foster Wallace or whatever. And I pick all the books. So what
other curriculum stuff do you have?
So then I also, then we do have the creative writing class. And then we do literature. Like next week we're reading Down the Rabbit Hole by Juan Pablo Villalobos, which is an amazing book, which you should read. Last month we did Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad. We did, just every month we do a different book.
Are there things the prison won't let you do?
Yes. Many, many, many. Yeah.
What are a couple titles that stand out?
Oh, of books that we can't do?
Yeah.
I thought you were asking me, are there things that we can't do? Like, are there things that I want to do at the prison that I can't do? Yes. But in terms of like titles, yeah, there's always some title. Like I remember, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. They wouldn't let me bring that one. Mary Carr, Liars Club. They wouldn't let me bring that. Like, they're just weird.
So there's like a
random titles.
sensory committee that like vets the materials that you. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And I definitely follow every rule they give me. So I would never, I never bring in anything that they tell me not to.
Sure. Did you come up with the name Penn City Writers? Because that's really clever.
Isn't that cute?
It is,
no, really what happened was I said to the class, I was like, look, we're at a point where we're acting like a brotherhood here. So, cause they're like a brotherhood. They like march together through the prison, and they really take care of each other and stuff. And so I was like, we need a name. Let's come up with a name. Like next class, everyone come up with a name and then we'll have a vote. So the next class, everyone came in with a name except for one guy who forgot. And so we wrote all the names up on the board. Everyone wrote each their name. And then the one guy who forgot owed one of the guys, the guy who had brought in the name Penn City Writers, owed him a favor. So he voted for Penn City Writers, and everyone else voted for their own name.
So one by one vote.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Deb, it has been amazing talking to you. We could keep going for hours, I feel like, very easily. At this point, do you have any sort of final thoughts? Anything we haven't covered about your work or your teaching that you still want to talk about as we start to wind down here?
I guess the only thing would be, please do contact me, because we need people to read books. Like that would be like, I would just say that again. Please email me if you want to read books.
Perfect. What is your contact email?
Well,
that our listeners can find you at.
About that would be pencitywriters@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Okay, great. We'll put it in the show notes as well. We have an
Okay.
audience that is, I would say, highly engaged reading audience. We get emails very often from them and Instagram comments about books they're reading and stuff that they found on our show. And if you like this, you guys also need to read this and get this person on. And so I have a feeling you'll probably get a few emails as a result of doing this, at least a few. That sounds very cool. How about where can people find you online, Deb, and where can they find more of your work?
Well, I am on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not very good at either one of them. But I'm there. I I witness. I witness more than I.
You bear witness. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
And yeah, I mean, you know, you mentioned we talked about all my books. I'm working on a bunch of new stories and short
Okay.
shorts,
Awesome.
and you
Yep.
know, I've got a new. I want to do like for my novel, my next novel. I want to do like maybe like a trilogy of Barn 8. Like I want
Oh,
my
okay.
next one is going to be set a little further in the future, but not have chickens in it. Be like about a different aspect of the end of civilization.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm thinking about. I mean, I've been working on pages for that, so we'll see what happens.
Amazing. Cool. Well, we look very much forward to your future projects. Matt, I think I remember you saying once that you should never ask a writer what they're working
That's
on
right.
or like what's the
That's right.
next thing.
It's very
Yeah.
tempting, and
So I'm glad you brought that
I
up,
have
Deb, and we
I
didn't
have a
have to.
few just rules for people if you're listening. When you go to an author's reading, don't ever ask about another book. Only ask about the one that they're signing there. Don't ever ask what they're working on next. Um, yeah, just
Don't ever ask them about David
that's
Foster
just right.
Wallace.
That's
That's
just the top three right there. You'd be a good audience member
Oh,
if you just be like, just say focused on this book you're reading, and that's the only thing that exists in the world. And tomorrow might never come. It's kind of bad luck to talk about stuff in process. So let's just talk about what we can buy today. Everyone who's listening, go out and buy Barn
what we
8.
can buy.
Right. We're
yes.
consumers.
What can we purchase?
And let's be real, like people got to get paid. So
No,
Getting paid's nice.
I really think that should be our national motto. What can
what
we
can
buy?
we buy? We own everything,
Right.
right? You can't own a book. I'll be happy to donate this book to the Penn City Writers. You let me know how we can donate some books there as well, if
Yeah,
that's a thing. So
we will
all
talk.
right. Thanks
Awesome.
for joining us.
Deb,
And
thank you so much. We got a little bit of housekeeping here to wrap up. Speaking of getting paid, we have some new patrons this month,
all right.
Matt. People who generously give us a little bit of money for what we're doing here in support. And one of those people is Richie Spicer, who I've had a lot of back and forth with through Instagram, and we have tons of read stuff in common. He's got a separate Instagram called Hot Fudge Monday Reads. That's just like all book
Yeah,
stuff. It's
yeah.
great.
No,
So check
his
that
his
out.
Instagram is awesome.
It is, yeah. He was the first person to buy one of our shirts.
That's right. We also have these
Yeah,
stickers, say Concavity Show, with our new
we
logo,
have.
and all of
Yeah.
our patrons should get the sticker. I have a couple of keychains left,
Oh,
some
nice.
buttons, and some other merch for them. So our patrons will
Good.
get some merch.
Good. We want to thank Douglas Raymillard as well for joining the team. Harold Niver, who's new and is like very engaged. Like I'm seeing him everywhere on Instagram all of a sudden, which is awesome. And as well, we want to thank Nancy Resendez. Thank you all so much for supporting us. We so appreciate it. We also had some contest winners from the David Jensen Art Contest that we announced
All
last
right.
episode. And so we had Jack Waters, who's an awesome listener of our show and also a patron, Michael Thomas Taylor, and Michael Kozlowski all won David Jensen portraits sponsored by the Infinite Jest Twitter bot account. As usual, we want to thank the band Parquet Courts for their songs Tenderness and Instant Disassembly. Matt, where can people find us?
We're Concavity Show on Instagram and Twitter. You can always email us, concavityshow@gmail.com. We love getting emails. Um, And we do ask, if you've enjoyed any of our episodes, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, apparently that's really good and helps us out somehow. Algorithms and stuff. Deb Olin Unferth, thank you so much again. It's been great having you here for episode 63. And stay tuned for some bonus discussion.
Thank you.
Catch me now as I say, into darkness I thought to be extinct.
If you take a drink, I cut all your air when you're not talking, it's gone. You can cough, you can take the doorbell, there could be a garbage truck backing up behind you. But if when you're talking then something like that happens, then it's harder to edit out.
You guys are so professional. I've done a lot of these and no one has
Let
done
me tell
anything
you,
like
Total
this.
amateurs. It's not true.